So this won't take long, and the reason is because I'm actually going to ask more questions than I'm going to answer. I spent a couple of days talking about how international economics basically makes the argument that free trade is good, and from a economics position, it's really hard to argue against that. But what we know is that there's a lot of other factors that come into this. Not everyone's going to be better off. Even though everyone as a whole is better off, not each individual is better off. We also know that some sectors are going to be losers in this process, and they're going to have to change lifestyle and other things. There's going to be other values besides just economics that we value, like culture and politics and things like that. And then the other thing is that this may take a while, and in the meantime, it can be really messy for people. And so there's a lot of reasons why some people might not want globalization, depending on where they're situated in the world, where they're situated in terms of what they do, etc. What we know is this: economics are amoral. Now, let me be clear about this. I don't mean to say that they're immoral. I'm not saying economics are evil. That's not it at all. But we also don't want to say economics are good. Economics are amoral. In other words, they don't consider questions of morality. In fact, if we're going to be true free traders, if we're going to have real free trade, we mean the government does not get involved. Which means that, let's say that I wanted to buy and sell cocaine or buy and sell human beings. That's totally fine. If people are willing to buy it and I am willing to sell it at a price, according to free trade, that's totally fine. But then we say, hold on, I don't think that's a good idea. So that's immoral. So we need the state to get involved to prevent this immoral thing from happening. Economics doesn't see the buying and selling of products as of any particular product as moral or immoral. So we have to add our morality into economics, which then involves a little bit of breaking down of free trade. So we do know that we do want the government to get involved sometimes because economics can't do all the things we want it to do. So with economics, all goods, all bads, whatever you want to call it, these are all measured in terms of economic growth. Like we could have a conversation about human trafficking that is a strictly economic argument. It's not a moral argument at all, and that essentially that's how human trafficking is seen from an economics point of view, not as a moral issue or as an immoral issue, but just as an economic issue. Is it profitable? Other values have no direct place in economics unless we add them intentionally. And we do know, like just by giving the examples that I gave right there are times we want to get involved, that we want other values involved. And so economics and free trade is great, maybe as a starting point, but then we want to say other things have to get involved, and that's where it gets a little bit more messy. But what we do want to say is we don't want to say just free trade is perfect, done, because we know it's not. So then how does that sort of work? So let me give you another example here. Unchecked globalization is going to tend to produce sweatshops. This is just one of the things that's going to happen, is that essentially if you have unchecked globalization, then that means that buyers want to buy goods, all things being equal, they want to buy things that are cheaper, and producers want to sell things in such a way that they get a greater profit. What all that leads to is the lower that you can get wages, the better. So if I build a factory in a place where wages are super, super cheap and I can work people long hours and I don't have to pay for their health benefits and I don't have to provide, coffee breaks and I don't have to provide basic, insurance for them and they don't have labor laws and things like that, all these things would be free trade. And that will produce sweatshops. So we might ask, okay, are sweatshops bad? Well, I would say in general, we would probably say, yeah. Cheap labor is, we like cheap goods, but we don't like labor to be taken advantage of. There are moral issues when it comes to labor. Do consumers care about sweatshops? We know that consumers care about sweatshops. That's fine, but do they care enough to do something about it? That's the more important question economically. In other words, I care about a lot of things. I care about, for example, environmental pollution, and yet I still drive a car. I know that every time I'm driving down the road, I'm kicking greenhouse gases out, and yet I keep driving. So it's not a question of whether consumers care, it's a question of whether consumers care and that caring turns into action. Does it matter if they do? We can also say if sweatshops were eliminated, would that be a better world? In other words, if your project was eliminating sweatshops, would you think the world is better than it was before? But one of the things that's going to be really required here is if we're going to do this, if we're going to eliminate sweatshops, we're probably going to have to talk about somehow limiting free trade, which we just said was such a great thing. And we would have to say, how can you eliminate sweatshops? How would you go about that given all these structures? In other words, it gets messy, it gets complex. It's not as simple as sort of free trade good, not free trade bad. It's not that simple. And so how do we sort of talk about these things? How do we even structure what people think is a good thing? There would have been probably a time in the past, not so distant past, of course, where this idea of a sweatshop was not considered that horrible of a thing. Essentially, think about imperialism of the 19th century. It was basically built on this. Or if we go back to the 19th century in the United States and slavery, that's essentially even a worse version of sweatshop. And so there's a sense in which what we think about morality plays a role in this as well, which is changing. Is it possible to combine globalization, development, and fairness? I mean, you guys have probably heard the terms not just free trade, but fair trade. And yeah, there are attempts to do this, but it's not exactly clear. Economics, the bonus of economics is very clear. It either makes money or it doesn't make money. That's really the main thing that you're sort of looking at there. When we start to add in other things, now there's going to be a lot more of a debate about what fair actually means, or what morality actually means, or what good actually means. What we end up with often is this race to the bottom in terms of globalization, where essentially, in order to compete with free trade, I have to make myself more and more sort of cheap, and that can undermine some of those things that we think are good. But if I'm doing that, my neighbor's doing that as well because they want the business as much as I do. And so essentially we end up, in a way, competing to get the profit, but that ends up undermining some of the other good things that we want. So we might say, what conditions are necessary for development in an underdeveloped country? If we care about, say, a country like Burkina Faso, what do we need in order for that place to develop, to actually sort of grow economically, but grow economically in a way that we think is good? And this is tricky. What some people are going to argue, they're going to argue you can't have these things. Like, we can talk about fair trade all day long, but we're really just sort of artificially connecting two things together that don't go together. Free market capitalism, which doesn't care about morals, and these sort of ideas about fairness, which do, it's like oil and water. Like, we put them together, but they don't really work. Like, if we think about it, yeah, more people care about fair trade today and things like that, but let's be honest, the bulk of things that are being bought out there are not about free trade. So the question then becomes, is the system itself screwed up? Like, does the system allow us to have the better world that we want, or can you not get that? And that raises the question that's going to be a question that we're going to ask as we kind of go through this, not just today, but also at the end of the class when we read that book by Arkabugi, which is the question of, so do we take the system we have and sort of fix it, fine-tune it, or is the system so bad that you just got to get rid of it? Can it be changed? If we end up here, can you actually do this? I mean, maybe you say the system sucks, it doesn't work, but there isn't a better option, so don't even bother. Or maybe you say the system sucks, we got to start over again. The system we have does not work. And humanity has done that over the years, where they said the system we have is not working, we need to try something else. Not just fine-tune it, not make slavery okay, but just get rid of slavery. And that's the question that we want to have here. I'm not going to force you to sort of think about this right now, but it is a thing that I'm really, in this class, we're really talking about how do you fine-tune the system that we have to make it a better world for the project that you're working on. But we don't really want to take our eyes off of the idea that it may be that the system itself is broken and we need to get rid of it. That's a pretty heavy thing to leave you with on a Friday. But on the plus side, you don't have any homework, so there you go. I'll see you guys on Monday. Bye.